there's still this strong stigma against making education fun. At least fun in the ways that I guess, I don't know, I want to say non-traditionally would be considered fun, like just straight up playing games. But that is without a doubt where I tend to kind of always cycle back to. There's always these amazing stories about like a student that didn't want to write and just couldn't write anything and always struggled in their literacy and their writing, and the writing was just at such a low level. And the teacher was like, what if I got you to write a guide for this game you're playing 14 hours a day? And then they're writing at a college level in 2 weeks. It's like they're writing their own website. There's not a single professional in the world that can't escape imposter syndrome. So, you could have your PhD and, just be crushing it in your field, and you're still going to be like, yeah, I really don't know anything. Like, it brings a tear to my eye at the end of every single session, because like we go from this point where they always start a little bit more apprehensive because something that they're working on is a little bit new. And by the end of it, they're like making math jokes and like happy about it. The pace of learning in a school is at the pace of confusion, right? It's the teacher presenting their information and did anybody get that? Anybody questions? No? Y'all good? We're moving on. Okay, cool.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. Warm welcome to each and every one of our listeners for this week's Qualified Tutor podcast episode. We welcome on Matthew Batesold. Matthew's mission is to bring games into learning. A maths, science and writing tutor, Matthew weaves his love of gamification in education into each and every session. And quite simply, his students adore him for it. Hailing from Asheville, New York, Matthew has a wider set of interests than simply maths and science. As a snowboarding instructor and former director of teams of instructors, as well as a love of fencing, Matthew is able to use his experiences to further his students' learning. Today, we'll be focusing on what we love about tutoring, what makes it such a special form of learning, but most importantly, we'll be discussing how tutors and teachers can collaborate to reduce workload on the classroom and improve outcomes for all students. Possibilities for a new system, a new school system structure. And watch out towards the end, where we'll be discussing Matthew's upcoming live event of Math and Magic. It's going to be a great event for anyone who wants to learn about how to learn maths and what maths learning online really looks like. This event will be free and it's taking place on the 10th of April. So do grab your tickets. I'd love to kick off really, Matt, with a question that we often ask and which reveals a lot about who our guests are and where they've come from. So the first question is, what kind of a student were you, Matthew?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, and I was a curious student, right? The teachers would give me feedback like, he had a room that would travel across the ear that would travel across the room. It's like, so I was always like listening and like thinking about what's going on in the classroom. But my biggest thing is I hated homework. Like I would be a workaholic in class and I would help other students and I would do all these things. But as soon as it came to like, you mean I have to go home and do this again on my own? And it's the same stuff that I proved that I knew in class. Like, why am I doing this again? Like, what is the point of this? So I think that's the best depiction of who I was at least as a young child, as a student. As I grew older, as I got into high school, it was kind of like, all right, yeah, this is busy work that you want me to do. And it's just like, thinking in the back of my head, it's like, you're only making work for yourself, so good luck. And then, I think I saw a little bit more efficacy in my college assignments and things that I would do, but it was still just like, I've got other things to do. Oh no, I got a project. um, so that was, I was always engaged. I was always curious. I always wanted to know and understand things, but I never wanted to do more than I felt was relevant. And so I always struggled with that balance, and that's translated in my professional life. I tend to work really hard in the midst, if I'm in the office, if I'm there, if I'm doing things, figuring out problems. But as soon as I get home, like, oh, I have paperwork.
So in your role as a teacher, obviously, when you started your career out of college, out of university, did you find which part of that learning process that you had as a student transferred to your teaching? Did you find the whole paperwork side, the marking, tricky, but the teaching, was that the bit that kept you going?
Well, to some degree, my first foray into teaching in the public schools was really rough. It was an environment where I got hired to teach 2 weeks before the semester started. So normally the schools do all their hiring right as the end of the spring term. So there's 2 months of lead time for planning and figuring it out. And I got approached for this job. It was like, hey, we really are desperate. I'm like, okay. And it was a district that I had worked for before, but then it was multiple subjects that I had never taught before. So, I was coming out of my degree with all right, yeah, I'm a biology teacher. I got this. And then yeah, so can you teach physics? And well, we have a bunch of students that, well, we don't want them in the middle school anymore. We're just kind of moving them up and just make them like science. I was like, okay, sure, I can do that.
So a certain amount of imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's not a single professional in the world that can't escape imposter syndrome. So, you could have your PhD and, just be crushing it in your field, and you're still gonna be like, yeah, I really don't know anything. But I was just overwhelmed because I was essentially planning 2 curriculums while trying to keep on track of where's this going tomorrow. And so that really kind of soured me to working in public school. And eventually it turned into, I was back working with that school, but for a preparatory program. So it was this program that the US government has called Upward Bound. And so we work with first generation and low income students to kind of help scaffold the transition from high school into college and university. So a lot of that was enrichment and tutoring and a summer experience program where they got to see what college was like without it being like, if you fail, you're out of school. It was just like, no, we're going to have a lot of conversations about what you're doing with work. But, it was all about pushing you further as a student and, having those hard conversations about why is this important and why am I doing this? And, really hammering home the importance of understanding the world and figuring things out and defining who you're going to be. So that was great.
And so that was for students who were 16 to 18?
Well, so we started with freshman year students. So it would start with students who were 13 to 14 going into kind of the last 4 years of their secondary education. And, we track them through college and see how successful we were. But we would start as soon as we could. There's another layer to the program called Head Start, but that starts with the elementary grades. So even preschool age students, that program starts with, and that's just getting kids school ready, I think is the way that it was phrased back in the day. So yeah, prepping them for homework.
That's the number one thing. So yeah. You mentioned that there were a couple of things within the Upward Bound program, but do you think that experience working with that was what helped you get into kind of more formal tutoring?
Definitely, because so part of that I was overseeing the tutoring program, and then I additionally had worked as a tutor for the university that I was at, and then there was a preparatory college that I was at that I also was working for their math lab. So that I would go to my class, then I would go to math lab, do my homework, and then the rest of my classmates would show up, and I would help them figure out the homework. Um, and it was definitely those experiences that after I had moved to another state and worked in a private school for a year, that and still came to this point where teaching in the classroom setting was just, there was something that no matter how I tried to approach it was too overwhelming, was too just too much for me to handle. And it came to a point where I was just figuring out what I struggled with the most was trying to connect and adapt and respond to every single student all the time. And it's just an impossible task. It's Sisyphus, absolutely, right? You're never going to be able to, in a classroom, address every single concern or get a student into a good place to be comfortable and be in the learning environment without disrupting the rest of the students. But whenever I had a chance to work one-on-one, well, if a student was having a rough day, I could take 5 minutes and we could just commiserate, right? And check in on this, like, the world is on fire, my parents are terrible, my teachers hate me, and they're all evil. And then we can just be like, well, we're kind of stuck in this situation. What do you want to do about it? And usually it was, all right, let's work on this essay, or whatever the work was.
The
But
better of two evils. Yeah.
exactly. It's just like, well, I know I have all these expectations and I'm really not in the mood, but let's push through, And I just had a session with a student where they're doing this online course, but it's like module locked. So if they don't go through and finish the current module that they're on, they can't do the next one. Well, we got to their first like long essay, and you can't go on and work on any of the other like readings or small question assignments until you finish the essay. They were not in the mood to work on that essay at all. It was just, they were just in a place, we all get there. We get to those spaces where we're just like, this is not what I want to do. But we had that conversation, we looked into it, we tried to work around, and it was to the point where the student was like, I can go back and do all this work that I tested out of that I don't have to do. It's like, what do you mean? Why are you going to go back and do work you don't have to do, that you've proven that you already know this information, and the test module says you tested out of it? Why would we go back and do that? Just to do something. I'm like, if we're going to do something, let's just brainstorm and do the outline. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then the whole time we got to go through and complain about how the way that this online course was structuring writing an argumentative essay was just ridiculous, and not the way that they would write an essay, because the semester before they were in a fancy prep school and they've written a lot of argumentative essays. Now they're in the public school. What is this? This is a joke. But we got it done. Right. We got to the point with that. When I left, they were writing their introduction on an essay that they did not want to write, and it was going to be done by tomorrow. So
That's progress.
yeah. And where does a classroom teacher pull that off? I mean, some of them, mind you, they do. Like, that's the amazing thing. There are brilliant teachers out there that can somehow bounce between that student and still hold the class together with their like little kinky finger over here. Somehow there are teachers that can pull it off, and that was not me. I did not have the mental and emotional capacity to manage all of that at the same time and still go home and go, I want to make dinner.
Yeah. Okay. So tired teachers after a long day of work funding Deliveroo and Uber Eats. Is that what? That's the message from this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, so let's move away from what the skill that maybe that you struggled with in teaching, and move towards what skills you found that you were able to take from your teaching into your tutoring.
Yeah. To really dig into that, it's that connection to your student, right? The ability to have that moment of empathy and understanding and connection, that they feel seen, heard, no matter where they are, right? and being able to translate that into a scenario where they can have a conversation. They can think through these hard problems, right? The new math student that I've been working with, they have very, classic case of, oh, not really, I don't really understand math. I'm not really good at math. So we have conversations about, well, how are you thinking about this? Talk to me about that. What do you see here? What's the pattern that you're observing? And half the time, they're seeing the answer to the question that's presented to them. But when the teacher writes something on the board, they're like, I have no idea what you just wrote. And so we connect on that. It's like, oh, so I can point out, it's like, so you saw the answer, you saw where this was going, but you were afraid to talk about how to get there because you're not sure how to describe it or what words to use. And they're like, yeah, I don't get. And so then that's where we go. We can hone in on that conversation and focus on exactly what the student doesn't understand. Because again, they're working on one-step linear equations, right? It's adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing one number to figure out what the variable is. And so looking at it in the very generic, arbitrary sense of the algebra, they're like, it's obviously 8, but I don't know why. And so we can get into that. I was like, okay, well, like, let's identify, like, what are we looking at, right? What's the operation that's involved? And then we're getting into that language and conversation and definition of, okay, the operations that we're focusing on. There's 4 primary ones, right? And let's build off that. And so far, like, it brings a tear to my eye at the end of every single session, because like we go from this point where they're like, they always start a little bit more apprehensive because something that they're working on is a little bit new. And by the end of it, they're like making math jokes and like happy about it. It's just like,
I'd love to know, Matthew, what's a maths joke?
oh man, on the spot, I can never do good ones. Why? There's my favorite. Why is 6 afraid of 7?
Because 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cannibal math numbers.
Cannibal math numbers. I will. I'll do. I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult, which is, while you're still responding to the questions about having this conversation, I'm going to ask you to try and think of another math joke, one more, before the end of this conversation. Okay, that's your task until from now until the end of this episode, is to come out with one more math joke. Because
you're just trying to prove to me that I can teach in a classroom, aren't you?
I'm very unfairly putting you on the spot, Matthew. This is not in the schedule. Okay, so I mean, you've discussed there so many of the main reasons why someone should get into tutoring is the ability to sit with a student one-on-one and to really feel their problems, and to feel like you're working with someone to resolve the issues that they're having. And obviously, with education being such a central part of a student's life, then you feel like you're having a genuine impact on everything they do. So if tutors are able to kind of to do that, and if tutoring is becoming more widespread and cheaper and more available, why do we have tutors then when schools exist?
I think it's that same conversation, right? Schools are this body of, they're structured to be this body of learning and this focus, but they're understaffed, to say the least. Another aspect to my tutoring is it's a silent protest. I think we need more teachers per student. I personally have this opinion where if we have students in groups of 6 or more, and they're of the secondary grades, if they're about to approach university, they should be working on community projects and doing something serious, because the pace of learning in a school is at the pace of confusion, right? It's the teacher presenting their information, and did everybody get that? Anybody questions? No, y'all good? We're moving on. Okay, cool. Right, where really students are like, I don't know, like, right, we're all figuring who we are at that time, and we're embarrassed to raise a hand and ask a question and figure something out. Whereas tutoring, I have students that I've worked with for the past 2 years that are so far ahead of their cohorts that, like, I have a 7th grader working on pre-calculus. When they transfer to high school, like, they're if they're not going right into doing calculus work, like that school is doing a disservice to that student. And it brings up other
Just
sort
remind
of,
us, Matthew, a seventh grader for UK speak. How old is
sure.
a seventh grader?
So they're like, where are they? They're 11, 12, that age grade.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So again, right, when you're tutoring, you can focus on where their interests are, right? Because what they're engaged in and where they're thinking, that's where they're thinking the most and thinking the fastest. Whereas school has these structured cohorts of, all right, you're this grade, you should be learning this subject and this topic, and you should be having these conversations. And depending on how an individual is developmentally, they're not ready for that. And I don't want to say that schools are just, completely useless, because they're not. There's definitely a positive environment there and a good idea, but we try and put too much on too many individuals, right? We put too much on individual students and we put too much on individual teachers, because we have I don't know how it is in the UK, but stories of teachers with classes of 30 plus. Like, you can't manage that many ideas all at the same time, and that's one class. Those teachers are teaching multiple classes, so they have 3 sections of that, right? So that's not 30 students, that's 90 students or more. And that's like if they have the benefit of only having to teach one subject. But most teachers, like, okay, your math teacher is teaching 4 different levels of math in a day, and you get into a routine and you can balance that. But to try and also incorporate new thinking, new ideas, new discoveries in mathematics and science, in language, in communication, economics, right? It's hard to both stay in pace with those students and stay on pace with, grading your papers and doing all of that assessment work while paying attention to the world around you. So things get lost and things get left behind. And how many times have we gone into a classroom and we see teachers teaching the same worksheets and textbooks and curriculum that they've done since they started? Because you get in your first few years of teaching, you're just surviving. And by the time you get comfortable with that survival mode, you don't want to alter that or change that, because this works, right? You have gotten through 4 years of teaching with these worksheets and this workbook, and now the school wants to introduce a new curriculum and a new textbook, and you're like, are you sure? Do we really need to? So the ultimate thesis is, right, tutoring can focus on an individual student, right? I'm working with a chemistry student where we're bouncing around in different topics, and they're figuring it out, and we're going along the same pace, and we're actually catching up to their other classmates. And we started halfway through the semester, right? We're getting to a point where we're starting to do mole calculations and all that stuff and figure that out in the midst of, there was one tutoring session where they came in with questions about chemotherapy, and we spent a session just kind of talking about I framed it, my knowledge of how exactly this chemically works is limited, but we had a conversation about how those drugs interact with the body, because that's where they needed to think. And, in the moment, I didn't press for why, because it can be a very hard subject to get through. And they were clearly comfortable with where we were. And so we got to a point where I was like, okay, address their questions. Cool. What do you want to talk about next? Okay. We'll go back to whatever our topic for the day was. And, I still got to where I needed to get to, quote unquote, needed to get to. And things progress. I don't want to say faster, because parents and other people hear, oh, well, tutoring works faster. And then they're like, why is my kid not getting this? It's like, well, we're still working on some fundamental things that your teachers weren't understanding, or your students weren't understanding. And that is the why, right? Why does tutoring exist? Tutoring is, currently it's a supplement to the gaps that schools have. But ultimately, if my perfect world existed, there would be teachers that would be organizing at schools, doing it would look like college, but every student would have an individual, like, content administrator, and they would meet with that. They would have required hours to meet with that person, and that one-on-one meeting would be getting through the content, right? And getting through their understanding. And when they had their larger group meetings, they were working on their, teachers research project, or they were working on their own community development project, or something more relevant, something that they can have more of a buy-in and an efficacy in.
Yes, careful. You're suggesting a big change to the structure of the school system, but I'm very, very interested in what you're just saying there. I think you must have known that a question like that was coming, because you've jumped just ahead of a question I was going to ask, which was, I was going to put the big question on you, Matthew, as to what we do next then. If we understand the situation with classrooms, and that's been happening for a number of years, and we understand that tutors can be of use to schools, and we know that schools aren't going to go away and tutors aren't going to go away, then what's the crossover? But you essentially started talking about it just then, which was, instead of thinking, let's say, about classrooms, we think about meetings, and we think about group meetings, which would be maybe the traditional classroom, and then we think about one-on-one meetings, and there would also be obviously the logistical issues of more staff who didn't necessarily call themselves teachers, but who called themselves, as you say, tutors or support staff, or one-on-one meeting administrators.
Absolutely. So I can make this comment and say that the simple solution is just, well, we need more staff in schools, right? And that's simple until you get to the point of capitalism, and then it's not simple anymore, because for whatever reason, it's very hard to define value in education, especially at this level. And I think that frames the issue in the strongest way, because when I go back and I cycle through and I talk about that dream school of mine, what does it have? It has more people. It doesn't have less students. It just has more people. It has more adults. It has more individuals working in that field and doing different jobs, because there's just too many jobs to be done. How many times have I looked at the number of things a teacher does that doesn't get paid for, right? And if you tally those up into billable hours, like even the best paid teachers are still only making like some small ridiculous, like, how are you surviving on this amount of money with all the work that you're doing? It's it is this staggeringly ridiculous, just strange world. So to Occam's razor, this conversation is just, we just need more people in those schools. We need more individuals doing work in those schools. It's not an environment we can create with the current structure, but the current structure doesn't necessarily need to really be overhauled that much, because I'm sure if you talk to this, right now, mind you, we'll cycle back to that comment I made before about the teachers panicking about new curriculum plans, right? You approach an older teacher about this, and they might be terrified, right? Because it is so different. It is so new. But if you kind of zoom out and look at what that's going to be doing, right, in the structure of that, it's not going to change much, right? And it takes a lot of those tasks that the teachers were doing and says, you don't have to do that. That's the responsibility of another adult who's working with you to figure out what's going on and to have a conversation. There are schools trying to do things like that. One of the private school I worked for, tries to ensure that class sizes are small, and tries to encourage teachers to be dynamic and adaptable and assess, like, if your class needs to go for a hike, like, we're in the middle of the woods, like, you could do that. Just make sure you're back on time for the next class. And even in that environment, right, teaching, I couldn't do it, right? But if I was, and I still work with that school, but I come in and work with students one-on-one, right? This is where my calculus all-star is from, right? So it's that sort of engagement, that sort of environment that is needed. And it's just, we need more people. Hands down, we need more people in those schools.
Yeah. And the answer isn't that we necessarily, hugely fund teacher programs. It's that we take the enormous body of tutors that we have, and we integrate them into a school environment. And there's no kind of sense of replacement of teachers with tutors. It's not like that. It's a collaborative system whereby tutors can reduce the workload of teachers and can take maybe disruptive students, out of the classroom and help them with their basic understanding, which will prevent them from being disruptive. And I just keep going back to that idea. You mentioned something there which I really kind of influenced the way I was thinking, which was you talking about students as ideas. You said there that a teacher with a class of 30 students, that's just too many ideas in one room, which is obviously such an inspiring way to think of children, as this kind of this bundle of ideas, this bundle of energy that needs directing and moving, but by no means needs kind of pushing down and silencing and put your hand down and all that kind of thing. But we could go on for many hours, I'm sure, about the future school structures, both in the US and the UK or worldwide. But I want to bring it back to something that's taking place very soon, and which every single one of our listeners and their friends should attend. So, Matthew, tell us more about your upcoming event of Math and Magic.
Yes. So this weekend is the inaugural TAG Summit, and TAG stands for the Therapeutic and Applied Geek and Gaming Summit. So it is a collaboration of the Geek Therapy Networks, which is a power network we have here in the United States, and they have a couple of podcasts from South America as well, and the Bodhana Group. And so it's primarily a collection of therapists and educators and individuals coming together who happen to be something that hasn't quite come up in this conversation is that I'm a huge nerd. And they're individuals who use their nerdy and geeky passions as much as they can in their professions. So it is a collective of individuals trying to find ways that geek culture and geek media and just media in general can be used for therapeutic purposes and educational purposes. And so, as you noted, my presentation is going to be Saturday is of Math and Magic. And so this is a fun little expose about how to use the game of Magic the Gathering to teach math. And the presentation I'm doing is going to basically take you through basic level, like counting, association, pairing, matching, all the way up through seeing changing patterns of change, which is an easy, or not really easy, but a way to say calculus, right? Constant change, constant acceleration sort of things. So that is my workshop. And it's starting on Friday. You can go to, I think it's event.tagsummit.com. I have the URL somewhere lingering around.
It'll be in the show notes for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. It's tagsummit.org, and you can sign up for it. It's all online. So, in this COVID era, it's all going to be a remote video recording, and there's a media pass you can get that'll give you access to all the recordings for a whole year. And yeah, it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to it.
I'd love the sound of that. Okay. So just very briefly, top 3 reasons why someone listening right now should attend of Math and Magic, Matthew.
To reframe your idea about how you can teach math. 2, to give your math students a fun and engaging way to engage in numbers and patterns. And 3, just to have fun.
Well, that's 3 pretty good reasons. The first one, I think, is enough to convince anyone really to join. Reframe your idea of how to teach maths. In changing times, especially online, we've had requests from so many maths tutors who are part of our community on how to translate that side-by-side working with manipulatives and all these kind of things that you'd work with normally in person with a math student, how to translate that online. So lots of strategies, lots of techniques to pick up from the event, which is happening April the 10th. So that's that'll be 2 days time from the release of this podcast. So
Yep. So folks, get on it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. That was really very, very kind. I think, I hope this conversation has opened up, our listeners' minds to the possibilities of school structure.
Indeed, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. These conversations are a balm and a pleasure to have. I think we all feel invigorated when we get these opportunities to geek out about the things that we're doing and to just have fun and commiserate with like-minded individuals. So.
And celebrate, commiserate and celebrate and geek out. That's very, very happy to do that.
Indeed.
So we'd love to have you back on, Matthew, perhaps at the end of the academic year in the UK, or perhaps in the summer in the US, just to get more of an update and to hear more about upcoming events.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much for joining us, and we'll speak again very soon.
Okay. And I didn't forget my homework assignment. So here we
go.
Oh. So it's a little philosophical, right? But parallel lines have so much in common. It's a shame they'll never meet.
Very good. Very good. That one I haven't heard before. The previous maths joke I had heard, but that one.
Yeah.
Very good. Well done, Matthew. Thank you for handling your homework. A-star student.
I try. Excellent.
Very good. Okay. Cheerio, Matthew. Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.